everyone, and welcome to the virtual edition of our year-round member screening series, Film Independent Presents. My name is Rachel Bleemer. I'm the Director of Events here at Film Independent. Before we get started, I need to give a special mention to our incredible lead sponsors, the Hollywood Foreign Press Association, and our virtual screening partner, Vision Media. For our audience watching today, there's a question button at the bottom of the screen, and if you'd like to ask any questions to our panelists, please feel free, and I will ask them at the end. Now to the main event. I'd like to introduce our guest, co-founder of Miami's largest art house cinema, award-winning documentary filmmaker, arts advocate, LA Film Festival alum, and my friend, Kareem Tabsch.
Hi there.
Hi. It's like the mock audience. Yeah. So I'm going to start off with the hardest question. How are you?
I'm good. That is not so hard. Yeah, life is very small these days in these four walls. But you know, I'm doing well. Everybody's, I know, it's happy and healthy, and safe, importantly, and everybody's watching the movie, which is exciting. So I can't complain. I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Doing well too. Film Independent is busier than ever, which is crazy, but we're good. And everybody I love and care about is healthy too. So that's what is important. And watching a lot of television and movies. Just started Schitt's Creek, so that's been a lot of fun. Have you been watching anything?
You know, I have. I've not been watching a ton. I just finished the series Fear City, which was on Netflix. That was interesting, about the mafia in New York. And I'm watching randomly. We're watching this. I did finish Padma Lakshmi's series on Hulu, about like food in America, which I loved. That was really great. And we were randomly watching this show called Sing on Spain, which is a like Spanish live karaoke show, like competition. It's very clearly going to be like different editions around different countries, and they started in Spain, and it's fun. And then I'm trying to catch up with docs. I'm trying to catch up with stuff that I didn't see at Sundance, and so slowly but surely getting to those.
Great. So let's get on to Walter Mercado. I just want to give a little bit of background of how I grew up in a Jewish household in Miami. And although Walter wasn't on in our house, he was very much around in hair salons. Everybody would halt when he came on. Friends' houses, I'd be shushed. I even have memories of it being on at school. And as a child who couldn't fully comprehend, what he was saying, I was still so taken by this mystical, gender non-conforming being. And I wanted to hear more about your experience growing up with him in your household and how it led to this documentary being born.
Yeah, I mean, I also grew up in Miami, where I still live, and Cuban Latino household, and Lebanese on my father's side, but we very much grew up like with Cuban culture, which is so predominant in Miami. And Walter was a daily presence, like on the TV. Every afternoon at 5:45, our abuela would like shush us into with the threat of like a flip-flop upside the head if we didn't like come to a quiet while Walter came on TV. Walter had a daily segment on which is where I mostly saw him. He was very ubiquitous in the culture, but he had a daily segment on a show called Primer Impacto, which was like an evening news magazine. And he's like 5 minutes where he did his astrological predictions. He did the horoscopes. And it was just, it was a required viewing. You could hear a pin drop. And I would say a couple of remarkable things was, one, it's very remarkable for anybody to have the power to shush up an entire Latino household. Let me just say that. So you knew that was something like, what the hell is this guy?
What's going on?
What is this power? And then the reality is that Walter looked like no one or nothing you had ever seen before. He was just, I mean, we would say things now like over the top, but he really looked like he was from a different planet when you're a kid. He had, for those who either hadn't seen the film or not very familiar with him, it's just, imagine it's like feathered hair, lacquered on makeup, sequins and lace and silk and satin all at the same time. Tons of jewelry, and this very ornate background that was like, it's supposed to look kind of like a palace, meets a mystic's house. And you as a child, you had no idea what he was saying, really. Mm-hmm. But you knew that everyone in your household hung on his every word. And for me also, just, as like growing up being different, in the sense that I was now I know it's queer, but I don't even know that I knew it then. I could tell that he was different in a way that I was different as I got a little older. And I'd like to say that Walter looked the way I felt. So when you finally kind of see someone on TV that feels like in a way it represents you, and listen, I could never had the aspirations to be as fabulous as Walter Mercado, but he was different and he was beloved and he was this ubiquitous part of our culture, and he was famous and successful and my family loved him. And so that was a pathway to love and acceptance, I think, for me too, to realize that if he had this ability to be different, to be other, and be all those things and be so beloved, that maybe I could too. So it was really impactful for me seeing him as a kid, and when it happens when you're young, you kind of never forget it. It's kind of just etched into your memory.
Yeah, I mean, he's just such a mystical being, and his message, I feel more than ever, is something we all really need right now. And can you tell us a little bit about like how this documentary was born? How did you meet Alex and Christina and come together?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's see. Alex and I have a mutual friend in common, Andrew Evia, one of the producers of Moonlight. Yeah. And Andrew, I was going to New York, and Andrew said, "Do you know Alex Fumero?" I said, "I don't." He's like, "You need to meet. You guys." Alex was from Miami. He's like, "You guys are gonna get along. You're gonna be quick friends." So Alex and I synced up to have coffee in Bryant Park. He was a VP at HBO at the time. And we were just chatting and getting to know each other. And really, one of the first things we really talked about was Walter Mercado. Walter had been in the news and in the media that Walter was having an estate sale in Miami. He had a condo in Miami for decades, and he was going to sell his condo in Miami. And the plan then was he was going to move to New York part of the year and live between Puerto Rico and New York. And Alex was very jealous that I told him I was going to this estate sale. And he said, "Gosh, somebody should make a documentary about him." And I said, "Well, I'm going in hopes of, one, to buy a cape if I could afford one, and two, to try to make contact with Walter's family." And Alex said, "Look, if there's any way I can help you, let me know. I would love to be involved in something." So I went. I didn't buy a cape because it turns out I'm still a poor filmmaker. But I did buy some tchotchkes, and did a lot of snooping around like what Walter Mercado's condo would look like. And I met Walter's niece, Danette, and I kind of gave her just an elevator pitch right there. I'm like, "Look, I'm an independent filmmaker. I want to do this, blah, blah, blah." She's like, "Okay, well, let's keep talking." And then I went back 2 days later, the last day of the sale, which is where you get the real good deals. Mm-hmm. I took it later in the day, and I took the time to talk some more to her. And she's like, "Look, I think it could be something that Walter would be interested in. Here's my email address. Here's my card. Send me an email. I have to talk with my sisters. I have to talk with Walter, and we'll see." And so then Alex and I had scheduled a call, our kind of first production call, and I was going to debrief him on my conversation. Half an hour before that call, Christina Costantini called Alex. Christina and Alex had worked together at Fusion, and she called and said, "Listen, I hear you're obsessed with Walter Mercado. I am too, and I want to make a documentary about him." And Alex said, "You're not going to believe this. I'm already making a documentary about him. I have my first production call with the other director in half an hour. But I think you guys would get along well. I think you might have complementary skill sets. Why don't I see if he's into you joining the call?" And that's exactly what happened. I got a text message. I'm like, "Sure." We had a 45-minute phone call, the three of us. And at the end, we decided that Alex would produce and Christina and I would co-direct.
Wow.
And all we had to do was convince Walter.
Okay, well, let's move on to that. How did you convince him to come back after years of not being on television and being such a private figure? What was the convincing factor, and how was the first time meeting him?
I don't think it was very difficult to convince him, to be honest with you, because I think he always had a desire to be in front of the cameras, and he missed he missed production. He missed being in front of the lens and the lights and the energy. So that wasn't necessarily difficult. I remember we had a phone call scheduled, and it was the three of us, and it was Walter, his assistant Willie, his secretary Wilma, and his nieces. And it was a very Latino meeting. There were like speakerphones, and everybody was loud and talking at the same time. I vividly remember that. I'm like, you could only understand, because everybody was talking for each other. But we had, Christine and Alex and I had rehearsed kind of like, well, what could he ask? But this is an iconic figure, you want to get it right. And, we talked and we just shared our vision. He said, okay, I'm interested in the project. I love that young people are interested in me, which I loved that he said that.
Of course, yes.
And then he said, but I have one question for you. What are your astrological signs? And I have to tell you, we at no point thought that this would come up. We really were like, we were like a little dumbfounded. I'm a Libra, and Christina's a Libra, and Alex is a Sagittarius, and apparently that was the right answer because he said, I'll do it. If one of us had been a Capricorn, I don't know what would have happened. I mean, yeah, exactly. We've taken a movie about somebody else.
Wow.
But timing-wise, that was right before Hurricane Maria. So obviously that, devastated Puerto Rico. Walter's home was hit significantly. He was without power for months. There was damage in the home. So that kind of slowed down progress for a little bit. We were in touch with them and checking up on them, but we went to Puerto Rico. We shot with Walter. We met and shot with Walter first week of February of 2018. The funny thing about that is Christina and I met in person for the first time the day before we met Walter.
Wow.
So in many ways, this is like an arranged marriage that could have not worked out, and we're so delighted that it worked out as well as it did, and that we've become very close friends through it all. But yeah, it was. It was
in stars. It was meant to be.
It was in the stars. That's right. That's right.
With Walter, I mean, he just had this cheekiness. Well, you showed more this like cheekiness sense of humor, and how he would call himself like, I'm the only virgin in town, or his modest rings that were, enormous crystals. Tell us, like, was that on camera or was that always? Was there a difference when the cameras were on, or how was that experience?
I think that it's a few things. I think that when we went in and meeting him, I think that, maybe we thought it was all an act, maybe when the cameras were off, he was somebody completely different. But the funny thing is, in the 2 years that we shot with him and spent significant amount of time with him and got very close, we soon realized that he was the same person on camera or off camera. I remember several months into production after one of our shooting trips, we were a little frustrated. We felt like we weren't getting what we wanted and needed.
Yeah.
And we mentioned that to one of the nieces, and I said, we need to get more of the real Walter. And she looked at us, she was like, I don't think you're getting it. This is Walter all the time. He's been like this since we were children. This is who he is. And that means, a lot, maybe less, the jewelry he would wear at home is a little smaller, not as much sequins.
Right.
But that personality, those interests, his way of talking, the same thing. Yeah. So, if it was a persona that he created a very long time ago, that persona and the Walter of birth merged into one, and that was who he was. But he was the same on camera or off, in the sense of he had a wicked sense of humor. He loved making you laugh. He could have been just like a comedic actor because his timing was impeccable. You see that in the film. He would take every opportunity to make you he found a great deal of joy in making other people happy. But he also was incredibly charming and incredibly smart. So he didn't like talking about negative things. You know, the harder times in his life were not things he liked to dwell on. And anytime he really didn't want to answer a question, he would lean in on his charm and his sense of humor to disarm you. And it was incredibly effective. And listen, I want to say we're very good, and we had difficult conversations with him. Christina's a brilliant investigative journalist.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but even then, Walter is just he leaned into that, and he'd been doing it for so many years. I think that the thing is that the person you see on the screen is the same person who he was when the cameras and the lights were off.
Yeah, you could see like there were certain questions you asked where he would kind of do this workaround and not quite answer it, but you still got something that you felt fulfilled with. He was good at kind of blocking out some truths, but at the same time giving you such like valuable content. How many hours did you actually how much footage do you have, and what got cut that you wish stayed?
That's a good question. I mean, we have, I would imagine, several hundred hours of footage. I don't even think we've done a complete evaluation of how much we have. I think we had a little over 30 full shooting days worth with him. So, that's a lot. There's tons. There's really a lot. What got left on the cutting room floor? There's a lot of things that didn't make it into the film. I mean, the great thing has been that Netflix has been such a good partner in helping us get out some of our favorite moments in the film. So now those are making their way into social media, particularly with Con Todo and most channels. So that we have a little beat about his relationship with dog Bruno, who's adorable. Walter's learning to speak English is quite funny, and his mispronunciation of words. One that just dropped was Walter's. We found this out in interview for Walter. One of Walter's gurus was Bagnish Ragnan Osho. If anyone saw Wild Wild Country, the Netflix series, Osho from Wild Wild Country was one of Walter's gurus. Before the Oregon years, while he was still in Pune in India, Walter liked to point that out to us. He gave Walter one of his kind of one of his other names, which was Shanti Ananda. And so this is something that's come up a little bit from maybe like super hardcore fans, and it's something that we couldn't really make fit in the film, was that there was a time period when Walter, during the legal troubles, when he lost the use of his name and likeness, that Walter tried to kind of reinvent himself using this spiritual name that Osho gave him. It was really short-lived. It really was not successful at the end of the day. So it just felt like another kind of complication to include in the film that didn't really make many material difference. So we didn't get that in there. Some people who know a lot about the story have asked about it.
Yeah.
But I love that there's an Osho connection, because I loved Wild Wild Country so much.
That's wild. But and also like the Netflix tie-in with that too.
Right, exactly. Great. What is the odds of that?
Yeah. Wow. Not the answer I was expecting. That's great. Were there any films that you, while like cutting this and putting it together, that you were referencing, like any inspirational docs that you'd like to mention?
Yeah, there's this few, and we kept talking about what they were going in and recommending stuff to one another to watch. I really adore the documentary Chavela by, I can't think of her name now, Gund. I love that doc. I think it's a fantastic film. And it was something that was used a lot using, it was all archival for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
That was a really wonderful doc. We referenced, I think also because this Walter lent himself to it, Grey Gardens is a reference in the film. Sunset Boulevard is a reference in the film. Walter is very Norma Desmond.
Yeah.
And the great part of it, I will say, is that in some interviews with journalists, they've brought those two movies up And I'm like, well, that's wonderful because we thought about them certainly, and I think that that's because of Walter. But the other film that we watched a lot was that watched a lot, but it certainly informed us was The Kid Stays in the Picture,
Mm.
and that the Robert Evans film, and what I loved about that film is Robert Evans is never he's alive when it was made, and he's never shown, but his house is his house is the main star of that film.
Yeah.
And for us, Walter's house was such an extension of who he was, kind of like Evan's place was. So I think that informed us, and a lot of our favorite moments in the film or in our film are those beautiful shots of his house and his robes and his tchotchkes that kind of help you realize the world he had created for himself, which is the world he wanted to live in. Yeah, I think that those are the main ones. Those are the main ones we referenced.
Yeah, it's fun. Like while watching too, I've watched it a few times before this, and spotting like, oh, there's a doll, there's a Walter Mercado doll on the couch in the cape, and like you just see these little like Easter eggs or findings that are so exciting. So much detail. What was?
I will admit that the doll, which I love, I love the doll so much that I would move it in and out of different scenes.
It was like still like hidden. You had you look at it, but yeah, that doll was incredible. Would you say that's your favorite thing you found in the house, or were there any like little artifacts that just?
I have to tell you, we were going to that house for 2 years, and we were given carte blanche. I mean, it took a while to gain trust, but at some point we're like, you go wherever you want in the house. You could look, we were hunting for archival stuff. But every time I feel like we spotted something new because it was one part grandma's house and one part ashram. It was the weirdest mix of things and chock full of things in every corner. I loved the cheekiness of that doll. I loved because it was actually the cape. It's wearing a cape that is a replica of one of Walter's capes. But also because it's like a Ken doll and like this quote unquote perfect image of a man. I love that Walter would love that so much. There was if I had to pick a really favorite thing, he had there's this big painting of him behind his desk that you see in the film. It's kind of like multiple faces of his. Yes. I love that piece. It's just it's a bold piece. And it feels like exactly like something Walter would own. That is a piece I particularly love. But there's and I mean, the capes are just we tried on the capes every day. Every day that we shot, at the end of the day, we tried it.
Yeah.
I mean, we like to joke that the reason we made the film so we could play Walter Mercado drag. I mean, it was a sheer joy. So it's hard to pick just one favorite. It really is.
Yeah, it's a treasure chest. Tell me about the animations between like the chapters. Those were just, I want to see an entire film of those already. They were stunning, and I know you've done that before, different style, but with Dolphin Lover, like just having these inserts of animation and playing with those, doc and animation, which you don't see a lot. It's really special. Who made them, and tell us a little bit about that process.
Yeah, I love animation. I love to make something fully in an animated world. Part of the important thing was we wanted to be able to take the viewers into Walter's kind of magical world. When he's talking about moments that, there's no other footage for. We thought, well, can we shoot recreations? We shoot a few recreations in the very beginning of the film. You see some recreations of like households, but when it meant more like connected to Walter, we thought recreations weren't going to just get the magic just right. So we thought animation's an interesting thing. Christina said, what about if we do something using tarot and tarot cards? Mm-hmm. Walter's a big tarot lover, and I was very excited by that idea. And Walter's favorite tarot deck was the Rider-Waite deck, and they have a very kind of particular line drawing style. So we thought it would be great to do something animated in that style, which we could use to really kind of transport people into Walter's magical world. There's an animator named Alexa Lim Haas, who I adore. One, she's an amazing person, but two, she's just a brilliant, brilliant artist. Alexis had a couple of films at Sundance and at South by Southwest, and I had long admired her work and wanted to work with her. So I reached out to her, and we brought the Christina's idea of the tarot deck, and we fleshed out what those cards would be. We came to her and said, we'd love to do something inspired by this. And to her credit, I mean, she's just so brilliant. She took it and really transformed them. You know, all of the illustrations use a blend of elements that are found across almost all of the tarot cards. Yeah. So I think visually it's really, really stunning. And it helped kind of like anchor the story, because one of the things we do in the film is we almost use the tarot cards as chapter headings, for lack of a better term. Yep. It's kind of, we transition from different moments in Walter's life, and I think that was a really kind of effective device for us in the film. It really is some of my favorite things to watch. I watch it and I'm still kind of like blown away by it. Yeah. She did an amazing, amazing job.
Mesmerizing. I loved it. Tell us a bit about how Lin Manuel got involved in this. I mean, that was just, you know, it's a secret, you know, for those of you who haven't seen it, sorry, but you're taking on this journey, and then it's like, you know, the very last half hour, I would say, Lin Manuel shows up, and it just, and then how emotional he is just brings it to a whole next level too of the importance. How did he get involved? Was he like, yes, I'm in? You know, tell us about that process.
Yeah. So, you know, we knew that Lin Manuel was a Walter fan. He had posted on Twitter throughout the years, and he made comments about Walter. And so we knew that he was a fan. There was a fan in him. And we knew that Lin was going to be in Puerto Rico with Hamilton. She was doing a big fundraiser in Puerto Rico, post-Maria. Mm-hmm. And so we timed our trip to be at the same time as Lin there, not with the hope that somehow we could get to him and reach out. And we knew that he had never met Walter, and he had an interest in meeting Walter. So through Alex Fumero, his is a friend of Lynn's, they have a friend in common. And he just let it know. It's like, hey, I know Lin would love to meet Walter. We could help make that, you know, we could help facilitate that if he's interested. And Lin pretty much immediately said yes. He was not doing basically any press in Puerto Rico for Hamilton. He turned down everything except the opportunity to meet Walter Mercado, because it was like a childhood hero. So he reached out wanting to make it happen, and that's what happened. And it was really, really magical. I mean, one of the things that you don't really see in the film is that Walter had not been doing really well that week physically. He started suffering late in life with sciatica, among a multitude of health issues. And he really had to draw every bit of energy to make it there. But he also loved Lin. He was a Lin fan. So he was excited to meet Lin. Yeah. And so it was a really kind of enthusiastic moment, and really emotional. I mean, you know, what you don't see is that behind the cameras, Lin's team, Walter's family, everybody's crying and excited because it's such an emotional moment. And Lin was kind of a stand-in for all of us who grew up with Walter. You know, he, you know, without prodding, he said all the things that we felt, and all the things that Walter meant for us. And, you know, when you see somebody as famous as Lin really kind of fangirl out over somebody like Walter, you know, it kind of helps drive home what a huge cultural impact he had. And also, frankly, it helped us, I think, in getting the film financed and sold. We had no money. At that, when we shot with Lin, we had really no money. We had called in favors, deferred payments, but all of a sudden now we had this footage. Lin was in the film and was so enthusiastic, and I think that helped for people who don't know Walter to kind of understand what his cultural significance was.
Yeah, it definitely bridged that gap. Was that helpful when like pitching to Netflix? Is that kind of what?
I think it was helpful in a couple. I mean, we had some investment from Topic Studio, which didn't come until afterwards. But once they saw that, I think that was really helpful. I certainly think that Netflix was also, knowing that you had Lin in the film and he's such a huge star was really helpful. And that not just that he's a huge star, because I don't think that that's their only thing that they're interested in, but the fact that he kind of articulated how audiences were feeling, I think was going to help sell it to people who didn't know Walter. So I think it was really, critical in kind of helping get the interest in the film to those who didn't already know what a big deal Walter was.
What exactly?
It was really an extra layer of helpfulness.
Mm-hmm.
And it's such a magical moment in the movie.
It really is, when they're like, kind of, Puerto Rico loves you. No, Puerto Rico loves you. And they're just kind of like going back and forth on like, how much love they have for one another and Puerto Rico. It was, that was very emotional. I mean, I wept.
Still get teary-eyed.
Yeah, I do too.
And I like to say, I made the thing, and I still watch that thing. Like I've seen it a million times. Even watching it at home, I'm like, because it was such a joyful moment.
It really is. And I was very lucky to be at the premiere at Sundance, which was still in 2020, which feels like a totally different time. And it was, I think it was it was my birthday, and it was like the 9 a.m. screening. And the entire theater was just weeping throughout. And it was just so special to have, his family members there. Willie, just a few months after he had passed away. And, you guys coming out with his capes, and just, you felt the emotion. And one other little small thing that I remember, we all came out, and it was like the first time snow had hit in Park City for that, when the start of the festival. And it just really, it had like this magical presence that Walter was there. So special. Did Walter get to see a take or, parts of the film before passing?
So Walter got to see, Christina and I went back to Puerto Rico about 5 weeks before he passed away. And we were able to show him about 15 minutes of the film, the earlier part, kind of his early career and Clyde's rise to fame. And he was very, very happy. And he was very, very encouraging and enthusiastic. And it was it's really surreal to watch him watch the film. We worked really hard and tirelessly because our hope was that Walter would be able to enjoy this. It would have been a resurgence. And we wanted him to be able to enjoy it. And sadly, he passed before he was able to see the finished film or see kind of how celebrated the documentary has been and this renewed interest in him. But it's remarkable, and we're all skeptics. I should point this out. We're all skeptics, but there's a lot of just like funny, the way that the three of us kind of came together, which is really odd. The other odd thing is that, we submitted a cut of the film. We got a deadline extension from Sundance. We submitted a cut of the film, our really first solid finished cut of the film on November 1st to Sundance. And Walter died on November 2nd. And, in a way, I think he knew his job was done. He knew he did everything he had to do. And so even though he didn't get to see it, I think he knew that he was in good hands, and that meant a lot to us.
Of course. Wow. It's almost like he also knew it was coming for 2020. It's like, it's about to, it's
tapping out. Don't forget that. Not interested in 2020.
Well, I'm going to take a few audience questions before we wrap up here. Did Walter see or hear about Dolphin Lover before committing to the project?
That is a very good question. Walter, you know what? I think he did actually, because I will tell you, the very first time we met Walter, I'm just trying to recall. I do think I did talk to him about the film. The first time we met Walter in his house, I remember we got there. We were all very excited. And Walter's house is clearly Walter's house. And the moment you walk in, you're just overwhelmed by everything. And we were taken upstairs, and we were sitting in one of the sitting areas. And, you kind of had gone through the house at this point, and you're like, there's saints and pictures. And we're in this, like, sitting area, which is like a sunken-in living room. So it's about 3 feet from the main living area. And
Mm-hmm.
we're talking to his family, and we're waiting probably like 40 minutes for Walter. And then all of a sudden, I hear Kareem, Christina, Alex, and you look, and there's Walter's in head to toe white linen, these gold rimmed glasses, and he's standing 3 feet above you because he's still in the main living space, and it looks like an apparition, like he's like a vision you just had. But then he came up and he talked to us, Kareem. I heard about The Last Resort. Congratulations! I love your work, Christina. Science fair, and you're just like, because he would do his research. He was just always such a prepared person. He was the consummate professional. So I'm pretty sure he had already seen Dolphin Lover at that point. And I feel like I do recollect a conversation about it. Let me tell you, Walter was one of those people I feel I could have talked to about anything.
Yep.
Because he would have not judged you.
Yeah, not a flinch.
Not a flinch. Yeah. I mean, he'd been around, seen everything. Yep. And I don't think he would have flinched at it. And I have the vague recollection of that conversation. I don't remember him being particularly shocked. He was a hard person to shock.
Yeah.
So, but if you haven't seen Dolphin Lover, people, see Dolphin Lover. Best short documentary at LA Film Festival.
LA Film Festival. Yep, 2015.
So just really exciting.
There's a tale that goes around Film Independent. I don't know if you're aware of this, but after the festival, they did a screening of it. I wasn't there yet, for the staff at like 10 in the morning. Really not with much detail, and the entire staff all watched Dolphin Lover together. And still to this day, it's brought up on, it was a little awkward sitting next to your boss and watching a man talk about sex with dolphins, but you're a legend.
I'm working so hard to be remembered. Who knew that this is what is going to do it? I love that people still bring it up all the time, and I kind of love it. Love it.
I don't know if you've seen She Dies Tomorrow yet, but it's coming out in a few weeks, and there's a whole bit about having sex with dolphins in there, and I'm like, this has been done before. But yeah, no, it's good.
I haven't talked to Amy in a long time, but maybe she's right.
That's right. Okay, a few more questions from Michael. Do you have a favorite cape?
Oh, that's a good question. It is so hard to boil down to a favorite cape. For a very long time, I really loved the one of the ones where he's there's a seated interview where he's in a cape that like we shot. There's two of them. There's one that's like an aqua color, and then there's one that's like an emerald green bottom with a very sequenced top. I really loved that one for a really long time. But I think also like the family brought, as you mentioned, to Sundance, some capes for us to wear on the red carpet, which is really wonderful because I felt like a little hug from Walter. Mm-hmm. And the one that I wore there, which is this green and black, and green is not my favorite color, but funny that both of the ones that I like the most are green. I really love that one. It's part of like a whole outfit. It's reversible. There's two sides to it. Which,
of course.
Walter was on it. He knew that he had to, because they would shoot so many the segments like a month's worth in like a shooting weekend. He knew he needed quick looks, change of looks, or also like for appearances. He'd have sometimes multiple in a day.
Outfit
so I love how resourceful. They're hella heavy.
I would imagine.
Yeah.
So I mean, just the beading and the crystals and.
I'm hoping, if anything, that the film helps bring capes back.
Me too.
It's a good look.
It is. I'm here for it. I'm ready to start that with you.
I'm all for it. It's very good in the time of Corona because you cover everything up with one cape. It's like, yeah, exactly.
Okay, a few more from the audience. Let's see. Did Walter read your chart from Blanca?
He did. We made a pact going in, and we instructed any of the crew that was with us never to ask Walter any horoscope questions, any personal questions, because we didn't want to impose on him. It really kind of changes the dynamic of your working relationship.
Yep.
And it was something he dealt with all the time.
Right.
If he went to the market, if he went everywhere, somebody would stop, and we witnessed that.
Mm-hmm.
So we did it, but quite naturally, it just kind of came up. And so he read our astral charts. And at one point during shooting, his secretary Wilma, who we really love, Wilma's like, "What's your birthday and your time of birth?" I remember I was the only person who knew the time of my birth because I was born at 7:11 p.m. and so there's 7:11.
Yeah.
So I'm still a fan. But everybody else was like texting their moms, like, "What time was I born?" And then later, he just read our astral charts. So she came and she brought this printed out astral chart, and he started describing it to us. And we were like, okay. It was very sudden and very unexpected, but we did tape each other's our phone getting read. So we all have that, and it's a treasured memory. Yeah. I can't tell you that I remember all the details, other than he did say, he said, you are very creative and very passionate. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I like that. And then he goes, and you're also extremely stubborn. And I'm like, oh, that's true too. I determined. So he was right. Yeah, I was like, oh, yeah. Geez. Yeah, and so we all have that, and I plan to have it framed because then he wrote a really lovely
dedication
on the astral chart, and at some point I'm gonna have it framed and put up.
Oh yeah, that has to go up on that wall behind you.
That's right.
Thank you, Blanca. That was a good question. We have another one from Jeffrey. Could you discuss learning of his death? Were you prepared for it, or did it come as a shock as soon as you were filming?
When we started the film, we were making this film about like a childhood hero that we were helping rediscover and revisit and telling the story of his life. And about halfway through, what became evident is we were also making a film about aging. And, it was halfway through production that Walter just started having health issues that really prevented him some days from shooting at all. And he was in more pain and discomfort. And they were families, even as close as we were, they were closely guarded about a lot of things. Some things they did confide in us. But it just became evident. And from the person that we first met who would throw himself down on the floor to play with his dog and go up and down the steps, and to the person who, we saw 5 weeks before he passed, where he was basically bedbound, was a really steep decline. And I think we knew that his health, we knew his health was deteriorating. It took physical manifestations. I think you can even see it in the film a bit. As towards the end of the film, you see he looks a little rougher. Mm-hmm. So we knew that he was reaching the end of his life. Walter did not talk about death. Yeah. We tried broaching the subject, and it was, he didn't have any space in his life for negative things, and he was so full of ambition that he would be like, no, next year I'm going to Mexico and I'm working on a book project. And I don't know how much of that, I know the book is true. I don't know how much of the other things he would say were true, but I think it was a way of kind of keeping himself going. Yeah. And I don't think he was afraid of death. I think he just loved living. Yeah. He really, as he says in the film, he's surrounded by the people he loved in this house that he adored. He was, and with new things that he was interested in doing and endlessly wanting to learn. So he didn't fear death, but it became really evident. And then our last trip with Walter, it was about 5 weeks before he passed, as I said. We had said goodbye, Christina and I. We were gearing up to leave, and Willie came out, and Walter was in his bedroom at this point. He was pretty much bedbound. Willie came out and said, Walter says to come back in and say goodbye again. And Christina and I looked at each other, and we knew that was his way of saying it's time to say goodbye. And we walked in, and we told him we loved him, and he told us he loved us, and he said goodbye. And he didn't say it as in goodbye. I knew he was passing, but we we feel really confident that that's what it was, and it was, we didn't know how long he had at that point. I think Christina and I talked a bit about it, and I said, I think it'll probably be a matter of months. But we had hoped that he would, make it through the new year, and we didn't know about Sundance at that point, but we had our fingers crossed, and we'd hoped that he'd be able to. And 5 weeks later, he passed. Christina reached out to me and said, to Alice and I said, have we heard from the family recently? And I said, no, we haven't been in touch. She goes, I think we should reach out. And I think I remember calling. I think I was the one who talked to Yvonne, and she said, things are not good. He's very clearly at the end of life stage, and I think it was a day or two after that he passed, and really emotional. I mean, the whole process was really a roller coaster because we all flew to Puerto Rico for the funeral. Alex and I were pallbearers. We had just finished our film and submitted it to Sundance. We hear the news of Walter's passing. All of the massive amount of press around his death, which helped remind people of how beloved he was, and certainly helped folks realize the timeliness of the documentary. And then after that, we find out about getting it to Sundance, and then we're rushing to finish the film at the end of the year, and then we're at Sundance. And we premiered less than 3 months after he died. It was a whirlwind of emotion, but
quite the journey.
Yeah.
He did mention, and this is one of the questions about believing in reincarnation. What do you think Walter would come back as? Is a question from Hannah.
Wow, that is a really good question. I don't know. What would Walter come back as? He had such an ethereal sense to him, and this I don't necessarily know that he would come back as a person. Something like a butterfly or like a beautiful bird. So I feel like something that was just something a beautiful, connected to nature, but also that wasn't held down.
Exactly.
I think that's part of the thing, is that was what Walter was. That's a really good question. I never, we never even asked him that either. What would you like to come back as? But it's really, I feel like even though he's physically gone, I feel like we feel his presence all the time. I feel his presence all the time. And I think that's a sign also, just a life well lived that's left such a mark in so many people.
Absolutely. Well, those were our audience questions, and we've already been at this for almost an hour. Very emotional. I have a few more just about you and your next steps. What are you thinking about next? I mean, we've already done Dolphin Lover and The Fabulous Cat and The Jews of Miami Beach. What is next for you?
That's a really good question. There's a lot of projects that we have in development. Alex Fumetter and I have a couple of things that we're working on. I'm pursuing a couple of different things. I'm always interested in telling stories about people who bravely kind of live on the margins of society. That's something that really fascinates me. I mean, I think that's a thematic thread throughout the body of my work so far, and I kind of want to keep exploring that. Folks who kind of have been brazenly being themselves.
Yes.
So I have a couple of things in the works in that sense. Nothing just yet, and looking for other opportunities. So if anybody needs a co-director for something, call me. But I'll continue to tell. I mean, I'm very much committed to telling Latino stories, queer stories, Florida stories, just stories that hopefully that make an impact. Big stories about brassy people. That's what my interest is.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for speaking with me today. For those of you who have not seen Mucho Mucho Amor, The Legend of Walter Mercado, it is on Netflix now. And Kareem, please keep us posted with everything that you do. You are a legend at Film Independent for us, and a fellow and a friend. So we love you so much and wish you well, and we'll be in touch.
Thanks so much. Thanks everybody for watching and for watching the film. Lots of love.
Bye.
Bye.